The main task of the Ministry of Truth is to master the art of historical revisionism. This is Winston Smith's introduction to his new job at the Ministry of Truth. These could be Stephen Miller and Caroline Levitt in 2025. He soon discovers that his primary responsibility will be to rewrite history so that it always matches the current political agenda. If the party decides that a certain event happened in 1968 instead of 1953, then that's what will happen. And it's his job to make sure all the records reflect the changes. It's easy to dismiss this as just another example of how Orwellian our world has become, but there's something more going on here. If you want to understand why we have wars, why we can't seem to solve climate change, and why we keep getting manipulated into giving up our rights, well, you have to start with the Ministry of Truth. It was the first casualty of the 20th century. When George Orwell wrote 1984, he had just come out of a war that began with fascism and ended with nuclear weapons. And despite everything, people still clung to the belief that progress was inevitable. Well, Orwell wasn't having it. In his dystopia, progress isn't inevitable. It's manufactured by those in power, and they manufacture it through the deliberate distortion of facts. Facts don't speak for themselves. They must be interpreted, and if you control the interpretation of facts, well, you control the narrative. That's how you get people to do things that serve your interests. And the most powerful way of doing this is through the alteration of official records. When Winston starts working at the Ministry of Truth, he's given a simple task. His job is to take old newspaper clippings and make sure the information in them matches the party's current line. So if the party decides that a certain event happened in 1968 instead of 1953, then Winston's job is to go through all the old newspapers and make sure every reference to the year 1953 is changed to 1968. This is a relatively menial task, but it's very important because it demonstrates how the party exercises total control over its citizens. The party can change the past whenever it wants to, and no one can stop it. We may think that the past is immutable, that once something has happened, it cannot be unhappened. But that's not true. The past is malleable. It can be reshaped and reinterpreted to fit the needs of those in power. And once the past has been rewritten, the present and the future are easily manipulated as well. The Ministry of Truth is the heart of the party's propaganda machine. Its function is to ensure that the citizens of Oceania live in a perpetual state of ignorance. The party wants its citizens to be kept in the dark about the past, the present, and the future. The Ministry of Truth achieves this by controlling the flow of information and by manipulating the facts. The Ministry of Truth also uses sophisticated techniques of persuasion to keep the populace on side. One of the most effective of these techniques is doublethink. Doublethink is the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and to believe both of them with equal fervor. For example, doublethink allows the party to claim that 2 + 2 = 5, and for those who possess this ability, it allows them to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, while simultaneously knowing that 2 + 2 = 4. This is the real reason why it's so hard to get people to accept the reality of man-made climate change. Their understanding of basic arithmetic has been compromised by decades of exposure to sophisticated propaganda. And the same thing happens with all sorts of issues, not just climate change. When the ruling class needs us to accept some new lie, well, they just repeat it often enough, and eventually it becomes the truth. The reason this happens is that most people aren't willing to think critically about the information they receive. They just accept what they're told and make decisions based on that. The other reason why it's so easy for the ruling class to manipulate us is that they control the flow of information. Most people only get their news from a handful of sources, and all of these sources are owned by a few large corporations. These corporations have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, so they only report on events in a way that benefits the ruling class. But let's go back to the Ministry of Truth. Another important function of the Ministry of Truth is to produce propaganda for the party. Propaganda is a form of communication that's designed to influence people's opinions or behavior. It's often used to promote a particular political agenda. In Oceania, the Ministry of Truth produces propaganda that's used to glorify Big Brother and the party. It also produces propaganda that's used to demonize the enemies of the party. Much of the propaganda produced by the Ministry of Truth is blatant and over the top. For example, the ministry might produce a film that shows Big Brother as a benevolent father figure, or it might produce a play that portrays the Proles as a dangerous underclass. But the Ministry of Truth also produces more subtle forms of propaganda. For example, it might alter official statistics to make the party's policies look more effective than they actually are. It might also produce fake news stories that make the party's enemies look guilty of crimes they didn't commit. Fake news isn't new, as anyone who's read 1984 knows. But Orwell described a world where fake news is the norm, where the truth is whatever the party decides it to be. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of this sort of thing happening in our own world. Recently, we've seen a rise in fake news, which is deliberately false information that's spread to influence people's opinions. Fake news is often used to promote a particular political agenda or to damage the reputation of an individual or organization. In some cases, fake news has even been used to justify violence against innocent people. And this brings me to the last important function of the Ministry of Truth, which is to suppress any information that could threaten the party's power. The Ministry of Truth does this through a variety of means. It might arrest and imprison people who spread false information, or it might use violence to silence those who speak out against the party. In extreme cases, the Ministry of Truth might even kill people who pose a threat to its power. The Ministry of Truth is responsible for creating a culture of fear in which people are too afraid to speak out against the party. This is achieved through the use of surveillance, torture, and murder. The constant threat of violence creates a society in which people are too afraid to think for themselves or to question the party's authority. And this is what makes the Ministry of Truth so insidious. It doesn't just control the flow of information, it actively works to prevent people from thinking for themselves. Orwell knew that if people were allowed to think for themselves, they would eventually come to realize that the party wasn't looking after their best interests. Once people started thinking for themselves, the party's power would be threatened, and it would eventually collapse. So the Ministry of Truth's primary goal is to keep people from thinking for themselves. It does this through education, propaganda, and the suppression of dissent. The Ministry of Truth is the ultimate weapon of control. By mastering the art of historical revisionism, the ruling class can shape the past, the present, and the future to their liking. They can make it seem like the wars we fought were always necessary, like the climate crisis is just a hoax, and like giving up our rights was the best thing that ever happened to us. And sadly, they're really good at what they do. They've been practicing for decades, and they've perfected their techniques. Most people don't even realize they're being manipulated. We've become so accustomed to the lies that we've stopped questioning them. We just accept what we're told and make decisions based on that. But if we want to break free from the matrix, we have to start thinking for ourselves. We have to stop accepting what we're told and start questioning it. We have to be willing to think the uncomfortable thoughts that the Ministry of Truth does not want us to think. That's why it's so important to keep fighting for freedom of thought and expression. That's why it's so important to support independent media and to be wary of those who seek to control the flow of information. Because when we allow ourselves to be manipulated by the Ministry of Truth, well, we're just playing right into their hands. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Thanks for watching.